Hillary Clinton was asked a question by an audience member in her CNN town hall interview about arming the Syrian rebels. And, of course, the idea is President Obama was considering this. He was in favor of it for a long time, but we were going to fund the rebels in the hopes that they will topple Assad. So it ended up that we didn't do it because at the last minute, Russia kind of intervened and got a deal between the West and the Assad regime, and he ended up giving up a lot of his chemical weapons to the United Nations. So it was a win without anybody firing a shot, or at least without anybody firing a shot from the United States. So the question is, are you in favor of arming the Syrian rebels? And let's listen to what she would have done.
Unless you build relationships with people who you think are at least hopefully sharing some of your same goals and objectives, you lose contact. You don't know what's happening. And that leaves it even more dangerous.
Your own ambassador, the person you appointed, Robert Ford, to Syria, resigned, and he told me in his first interview that he did so in protest and on principle because he could no longer defend the Obama administration's policy. And we see where we are in the world because of this. I want to ask you, should you have tried harder? You were surrounded by the top national security people on a mission to stop terrorism. Should you have pushed harder?
We pushed very hard. But as I say in my book, I believe that Harry Truman was right. The buck stops with the president, and the president had very legitimate concerns. And Robert Ford, as I mentioned earlier, was an exemplary ambassador. He did just an extraordinary job until we had to pull him out because of the danger. And I think in some of his interviews, even with you, he said the State Department was pushing.
State Department, correct. But he said nobody else was listening. He said the White House wasn't listening.
Well, we did, as I said, create a proposal that both the CIA and the Department of Defense supported. But I want to hasten.
Would you do that? Would you do it in the future?
Of course, I would always speak out. I would always speak out.
Go back again and, arm and train.
Well, I said we should have done it, 2+ years ago.
That is foolish. And that shows you that she's just as much of a war hawk as Obama is, and maybe even more so. So let me explain to you why that makes absolutely no sense, and in all seriousness, it's just a flat-out dumb idea to even consider for a second to arm the Syrian rebels. So, to understand what that implies, you need to understand exactly what's going on in Syria. We have Bashar al-Assad, who is essentially a secular dictator. He's an Alawite, which is an offshoot of Shiite Islam, but again, he's secular. And look, he's not a good guy. He's done plenty of fucked up things. There were reports that he possibly used chemical weapons, although there was a lot of contradictory evidence that even if there was chemical weapons used by the government forces, it wasn't Assad that called the strikes. But at the same time, the rebel movement also, there was evidence that they used chemical weapons. But there were, a lot of reports of women and children being killed by the government forces. But again, you have to keep in mind that there is a lot of evidence that the rebels killed a lot of innocent women and children. So America was considering getting involved to topple the Assad regime, okay? And they made it seem like, it's strictly for humanitarian reasons. That's why we need to do it. Now, the reality is Assad is, of course, allies with Iran and allies with Russia. And we wanted a pipeline to run directly through that region in Syria, and he said no. He rejected it. So the real reason, most likely, that they wanted to get rid of that guy is to put in somebody who's more pro the United States and who is willing to do more business deals with us and who isn't aligned with Russia and Iran, because those, of course, are not our best buddies, to say the least, right? But here's the problem. To arm the Syrian rebels, well, the Syrian rebels are broken up into many different factions, but there are 4 main factions. You have the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, as they're called. Some of them are relatively secular. Others are also fairly Islamic radicals, okay? They fall into that category. At least some of them do, okay? Now, originally, the FSA was the biggest part of the rebel movement, and there was a time when they were more secular. Then as time went by, there were more Islamic radicals that joined the movement. So you have the FSA, then you have the Kurds in the north, okay, who essentially want their own state. And then you have a group called Al-Nusra Front and a group called ISIS. Al-Nusra Front is officially linked with Al-Qaeda, so they are jihadists. And ISIS, of course, is the group that they're also jihadists, but they're so extreme that even Al-Qaeda has disavowed them. But as of today, well over 50% of the rebel movement is Al-Qaeda or is jihadist affiliated. In fact, numbers go as high as about 75% of the movement. So for President Obama or Hillary Clinton to say, well, yes, I'm in favor of arming and training the rebels. Okay, so even if I'm being kind to you and I'm saying, all right, well, you're not going to help out the jihadists, well, you're going to train people who are working right alongside jihadists. And how the fuck are we supposed to know that they're not going to take the guns and turn them right over to the other people who are helping them topple Assad? It's micromanaging, and you're not going to be able to successfully do it. And essentially you're saying, let's be allies with the worst terrorists on the planet, ISIS, who right now they're about to topple Baghdad in Iraq, and we're considering fighting them over there. So it's just a ridiculously naive idea to consider arming the rebels. And then there's also the consideration that whenever we send goods to the rebels, some of those goods slip through their hands and go right to the pro-government forces. And by the way, who's helping out the pro-government forces? Hezbollah, a Shiite extremist group, as opposed to, ISIS and al-Nusra Front, they're Sunni extremist groups. So why would you want to get involved in that? It's a situation where neither side, we shouldn't be in favor of either side. Yeah, Assad's a douche, but so are the rebels. The rebels are douches also. Why would we get involved in that? So if you look at history, this is the problem. Just, Ronald Reagan, he thought he could do this too with the Mujahideen. We were so anti-Soviet Union that we funded the Mujahideen and gave them weapons to fight off the communists in the Soviet Union. Well, what happened? The Mujahideen later broke up into the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and then they fought us with the guns that we gave them. The same thing would happen if we armed Syrian rebels. This isn't fucking rocket science. But it's that American arrogance that, no, we'll be able to train the right people and arm the right people, and there's no way that this weaponry will get into the hands of jihadists. Except it already is! ISIS took over some American Humvees and took a lot of our artillery and weaponry when they moved in on Baghdad. And when they're moving through Iraq and took Mosul. So it's so naive to think we can arm all these people and train all these people and it won't come back and bite us in the ass. And then the final thing I'll say here is, even putting aside all that, the historical perspective, how we never get it right when we arm and train people, the foolish perspective, which is you're fucking playing with fire. You're considering arming a group that's fighting alongside jihadists, okay? If anything, shouldn't you be considered fighting a jihadist? That's the thing, it's so backwards in so many different ways. But the bottom line is not even 20% of the American people wanted to get involved militarily in Syria, and here's Hillary Clinton saying, no, I disagree, I would train and arm them. Inexcusable, man. We have a Republican Party that wants war everywhere and wants to intervene everywhere, and we have a Democratic Party like Hillary Clinton is showing you, we don't want to intervene everywhere, we just want to intervene in a lot of fucking places, including Syria. Here's a radical idea. How about you listen to the American people for once? I know, crazy.